Hello and welcome to The Hindu. I'm Priyali Prakash and you're watching Tipping Point, a weekly show where we dive into climate change events and the trends shaping our future. In today's episode, we look at the flooding in Bengaluru and Oslo's climate budget. This week's main story is the recent bout of intense rainfall in Bengaluru, which caused flooding in the city. Bengaluru was in the grip of heavy rainfall last week, which started on October 20th and left several roads and houses flooded. On the morning of October 21st, the Indian Meteorology Department issued a yellow alert for moderate to heavy rainfall or thundershowers accompanied by lightning in parts of Bengaluru Urban and Bengaluru rural districts. Anganwadis in primary and high schools were shut as a precautionary measure, and college authorities were asked not to use dilapidated buildings to run classes. The Bangalore electricity supply company infrastructure suffered damage, and many parts of the city experienced power cuts amid the heavy rainfall. We should also keep in mind this is not the first time rainfall has brought Bengaluru, the so called Silicon Valley of India, to a standstill. Just the week before, Kunena, Agrahara and HAL airport areas received 92 millimeters rainfall on October 16th, according to the data collected by the Karnataka State Natural Disaster Monitoring Centre. This was the highest ward-wise figure for the period. According to the IMD data collected for 50 years between 1969 and 2019, the Bengaluru Urban district is the most vulnerable to flooding among all districts in southern India. In this period of 50 years, Bengaluru Urban saw 73 flooding events, followed by Bengaluru Rural with 71 flooding events. Experts say that urban flooding, like what Bengaluru faces, is very common due to high population pressure in big cities. Urbanization causes increased demand for land, which is often unplanned and leaves minimal to no routes for rainwater to escape. This leads to inundation and flooding in residential and urban areas. Bengaluru has also seen widespread encroachment of its water resources and green spaces, which increases the chances of extreme weather events like excessive rainfall. We spoke to researchers at Well Labs to better understand the hydrology and topography of Bengaluru and how human induced climate change has made flooding in the city worse.
So Bangalore is very different from any other city in India because most cities in India were built along rivers, right? Bangalore is built on the top of a mountain. It's literally at the divide, the watershed divide of the Kaveri and the Dakshin Pinakini basins. So one problem is, of course, that when it's on the advantage, or is that when it's on water, when you have high ground, the water will drain away from the top, right? If you pour water on top of a mound, it's going to drain. Versus if cities are in river valleys, it's going to flow. Water flows into the city, but in Bangalore, water moves away. Now you can say, well, why do we see flooding? Because it's not just like a mountain where the water is going down. It's actually a set of valleys and peaks, right? It's an undulating terrain. It's not just one mountain and then everything's draining off. So you have many parts of the city which locally are what's called topographic lows. That means the elevation at that point is lower, and so the water naturally drains there. Now, the way to understand hydrology is that streams occur where the water flows into a place, into a natural topographic low. Now, if you ask the question, why do topographic lows even happen? Right? They happen when, like, over millions and billions of years, we are sitting firstly on a granitic system. That means it's a massive chunk of granite. Granite, as you know, if anybody has a kitchen countertop, is not a permeable kind of rock, right? So what happens is, though over millions, billions of years, it gets subject to the elements and cracks develop. And where the cracks develop, water starts flowing because it has spaces to kind of flow. And the river makes its own way. So it kind of carves out a more and more and more deeper, a deeper and deeper fissure into the granite, and that's how the water flows. So wherever you look, if you look at space from rivers in this region, you will see that unlike rivers in like the Gangetic Plain, the rivers here are straight lines because they are following these fissures, right? So the hydrology of the city therefore means that the lowest points in the topography, because the river has carved out its way over many millions and billions of years, that's where the water is going to flow to. That's the natural topographic lows in the city. Now, our ancestors, over hundreds and hundreds of years ago, figured out that this is a place where it rains only a few months a year. And if we want to kind of have water for the whole year, we have to build bunds on these streams and we got to store it, right? Which is why we had this history of earthen dams being built on the streams, which are what we now call the cascading tank system. Now, as the city kind of urbanized, the tanks became quote unquote lakes because we're not using them for irrigation and cattle anymore. And so that's kind of where the natural place, that flow accumulation, when it rains, the water is going to flow. Now, one problem that we have is these are naturally seasonal structures. They fill up in the rain and then they dry out in the dry season, and that's the role they're supposed to play. They're supposed to hold water only in wet years, and some of them were built sufficiently large so they only held water in very very wet years. And then the last bit of it, of course, is that sewerage, right? We built all of these lakes and drains to drain out storm water, but they're really full of treated and untreated sewage. And so and then the other problem is that when we went through the process of converting them from irrigation tanks, quote unquote, to lakes, right, where they became more of a flood resilient structure and a aesthetic and ecological structure rather than a drinking water or irrigation structure, we removed the sluice gates. So traditionally you could drain out a tank by opening a sluice gate. We removed that. So now what happens is they get sewage. They're full of sewage during throughout the year because people poop and bathe and wash every day. So sewage is generated every day. The sewage is going into the stormwater drains and it's filling the lakes. So now when it rains, there's no space for the water. Most of these lakes are full throughout the year anyway. While unless you actually draw them down in the summer and use that water in the lake for maybe dry season irrigation and so on, or even if the water quality was good enough, you could even use it for augmenting your drinking water supply in the dry months. And then in the wet months, it's available to you keep the level low so that it's only filling up towards the end of the wet season, and then you're able to. So this idea of what's a strategy to create room for the river, understanding that in our cities are going to contain both sewerage as well as storm water, and it's all seasonal. So that's kind of what we mean when we say poor infrastructure planning, right? And climate change is just making all of that worse because of the frequency and intensity of rainfall events.
Bengaluru used to have an extensive network of lakes and wetlands, which have now been encroached upon to provide real estate for cities' rapid but unplanned growth. These lakes stored excess rainwater, but with the encroachment, the rainwater has nowhere to go except flood the city. Even the city's storm water drains, which are meant to prevent flooding in Bengaluru, have been encroached upon.
Now, what happened was that a lot of the real estate developers, as the city grew, as well as the politicians, and I've heard quotes from politicians saying, "Why do we have lakes within the city? It's just taking up something which could help the development of the city in terms of real estate." So, in whatever wisdom or lack of understanding they had, they decided they were going to build tech parks and bus stations and whatever on these lake beds, essentially, because they're like, anyway, most of the year there's no water, forgetting that the few times when there is water, there's a lot of it and it's going to inundate. And that's what happens because whenever, and people have told me that when it floods like this, you can actually trace out the shape of the original lake bed based on where the inundation is happening. So the hydrology of the city basically says, yes, the lakes don't fill all the time, but when they do, water is going to claim its space.
So Bangalore has this cascading tank system. So which means that when one lake overflows, the stormwater drain connects it to the next lake, and then like it keeps on repeating till it reaches the river. And uh, like couple of iconic basically places in Bangalore which keep getting flooded every year, no matter like how much it rains, is like Manyata Tech Park and which if you look at like maybe if you just scroll back 20 years ago, it was place where like paddy used to be grown because it was such a marshy land, and now people have built like a concrete IT tech park there, which definitely is going to get submerged like no matter what you do.
The green cover of the city has also reduced significantly over the years. Green spaces act like sponges for rainwater by helping them absorb in the ground to reduce runoff. When trees are cut, rainwater flows onto hard surfaces, finds no way to absorb into the earth, and causes flooding. As we highlighted in our last episode, researchers have found evidence that climate change is making shorter but intense periods of rainfall more common, and this leads to more chances of flooding.
Like we have been, like if you look at the last 100 years of rainfall, Bangalore has been getting more and more rainfall, but the days of the rainfall has reduced. So it means that we are getting more intense rainfall over a shorter burst of time. And uh, like what do you say? That is where uh, I think on 22nd, the rain gauge near my house recorded 182 mm rainfall event. So that is like kind of unprecedented to especially in October. So and this is occurring more and more commonly nowadays.
Traditionally, the way we designed our cities was that you build a stormwater drain which was built for what's called a return storm, right? So you have something, what you would do is you would analyze the rainfall series and you would say after how many years does a storm of this size, so many kind of occur, and have we built pipes big enough? And typically you design them for a 10 or 25-year storm or something like that. Now the problem is, because of climate change, those things which are 10 and 25-year storms itself are happening more and more often. So what should happen once in 100 years is happening once every 5 years, right? So there is that piece of it. There's another completely different part of it, which is when it rains, even for a traditional 10-year storm, are we able to handle it? And the fact is that we aren't, because we actually haven't done the one thing that civil engineers everywhere else in the world have done, which is to build stormwater drains that actually drain out water from concretized areas.
We need to kind of look at redesigning of the entire stormwater infrastructure that is there in the city, because uh, like if you see the amount of built up area in Bangalore, we have I think only 3% green cover, and wetlands have been encroached, and so there is no space for this sudden amount of water that rushes into the city when it rains, especially when it rains heavily. So to kind of redesign the stormwater drains to carry the water more efficiently to the lakes, and at the same time to make sure the lakes are capable of handling the sudden surge of water that comes in. So, like one of the studies that we did found out that if you take all the water holding capacity in the lakes of the city, around 42% of it is perennially full. So, you need to start using the lakes more effectively by monitoring, what do you say, moderating the amount of water level that they have.
So, one problem is of interagency coordination, that the agency that manages our water and sewerage and the agency that maintains our lakes and stormwater drains are BWSSB and BBMP respectively. And these two agencies are not, firstly, they're not even both municipal agencies. BBMP is a municipal agency, BWSSB is a parastatal, right? And so, firstly, they're not even at the same level. They don't, report back to the same political bosses, so on and so forth. That being said, you could say, well, why don't they have meetings where they talk about it? They do not talk about it. Their aims and objectives are different. Their budgetary lines are different. They don't talk to each other at all in any way, shape, or form. So this idea that lakes fill with sewerage is not something that the agencies have a comprehensive view of. So how do you then get them? And now it's the first time we've actually had a minister for Bengaluru, where there's at least one political boss who can pull the agencies together. So, that is, I think, not a bad idea if the person is actually able to pull those pieces together, right? But it's not going to happen automatically, because agencies are agencies, they have to follow their mandates. So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing is in the way we imagine and design infrastructure, and also the incentives that drive that. Even now, you may be following that Bangalore has just received a massive World Bank loan to solve the flooding problem, and it's a 3,500 crore loan, massive amounts of money. A lot of that money is going into concretizing drains and rehabilitating drains, which is okay, but it's not going to fix the problem by itself unless you fix the sewerage problem in a comprehensive way and you make sure that the problem of the solid waste entering and clogging the drains, the problem of the muck from sewage entering the drains and therefore causing water hyacinth and just a lot of solid organic material in the drains is solved. And you also look at the fact that drains at the end of the day are encroached, sadly, for whatever reason, and we can't reverse the encroachment immediately. You're not just going to, even though if you look, citizens will say pull down all of the encroachments, but we understand these are political questions, because a lot of those are like tech parks. Are we going to just pull down all the tech parks? A lot of these are, are we going to pull down Majestic bus terminus? Are we going to, there are lots of private buildings which unsuspecting owners have made investments and put their life savings in. So politically you can't say that let's just remove all encroachments overnight. So that means then if you can't do that and you've reduced the space for physical space for water, then you've got to make the entire city a little more absorbent, right? So you've got to, like what's called a sponge city approach, which is everywhere, where you can remove concrete and add what's called green unpaved spaces and direct the water into it. So whether it's playgrounds, whether it's gardens, whether it's rain gardens and swales, whether it's under flyovers. So the retrofitting of that, I mean, that can improve real estate values as well. It can improve quality of life, it can improve air pollution. There's plenty of things that you do. Now it's not something that people will naturally do, because if you look at it from the point of view of a BBMP engineer, concrete is so easy, right? Firstly, there's money in concrete contracts, so let's be clear, that is a reason. But concrete is also just, even without the rent seeking issues, concrete is just so much easier. Everybody knows they have spent. Now you're suddenly saying no, you pave it, you put gardens, then who's going to pay the maintenance, who's going to pay the mali? So there's going to be an entire rejigging of the way we spend, what we manage, so on, to make the city from being just a concretized gray infrastructure city to what's called a blue green gray water sensitive city, with blue green gray infrastructure. So and that requires who's going to pay for stuff. Now this is one of the richest cities in the country per capita, in terms of per capita income. So it's not like in absolute terms money doesn't exist. There's a ton of CSR money that's going in. Real estate lobbies would much prefer that their house values went up, because instead of being on a stinky drain, suddenly you're sitting on this very beautiful walkway which is like cyclable and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of reasons, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of incentive alignment, but making those all align so that the money flows in the right direction. There are engineers are trained to think beyond just concrete, to thinking about green infrastructure. All of these things are what is required, right? And then of course and I'm a hydrologist, so I'm going to put my, as a scientist, one thing that we lack in the city is that we lack good flood models of the city. Now it's not like these haven't, KSNDMC and others haven't attempted this before, but one big problem is that the data are not all in the public domain. And I'm a big believer, and if you see any other part of the world, any other advanced city in the world, data on hydrology, on weather, on climate is all in the public domain, and people are able to then debate, make better and better models, use the data, run hackathons. I mean, you're able to do stuff so that you're able to ask questions. You're able to say where's the bottleneck, why is flooding happening there. You're able to just do better problem diagnosis.
In today's Climate Hope, we look at the Oslo climate budget. In 2017, Norway's capital Oslo launched its climate budget to track carbon emissions alongside its finances. The objective of the initiative was to make climate an active part of the city's decision-making process to achieve its climate targets. One of the main goals of Oslo's climate budget is to reduce the city's greenhouse gas emissions by 95% by 2030 compared to 2009 levels. The 2025 version of Oslo climate budget was released in September this year, and it reiterates this goal along with 4 other targets for Oslo's climate strategy towards 2030. These include managing nature to safeguard natural carbon stores in vegetation and soil so that forests and other green spaces can absorb more greenhouse gases, reducing Oslo's overall energy consumption by 10% compared to 2009, strengthening the city's ability to withstand climate change, and lowering Oslo's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions outside the municipality. According to the emissions report from the Norwegian Environment Agency, Oslo's greenhouse gas emissions reduced by 28% from 2009 to 2022. Transition to electric cars, biofuel, and transition from oil-fired to emissions-free heating have been the biggest contributors in achieving the reduction in emissions. Oslo has also reduced its energy consumption by 13% since 2009. They've done this mostly by phasing out oil boilers, constructing more energy-efficient buildings, and electrification of passenger car fleet. While Oslo's climate budget has made some achievements towards its goals, a lot more remains to be done. To achieve the 95% emissions reduction target, the city has to electrify heavy transport, building and construction sites, and port operations. The climate in Oslo, like most other places in the world, is also changing and becoming wetter and warmer. According to the 2025 climate budget, floods from torrential rains can emerge as a big challenge, which can be tackled with a robust floodway and drainage network. Oslo has 6 years to achieve its targets towards building a climate resilient city. That's all from this week's Tipping Point. For more videos like this, please subscribe to The Hindu.